Welcome to the Culture, Faith, and Politics podcast. I'm Pat Kahnke, and I'm happy to have two guests with me today. They're the hosts of the Faithful Politics podcast, Will Wright and Josh Burtram. So, hey guys, great to see you.
Hey, good to see you again, Pat.
Yeah.
Hey, Pat. Yeah, it's definitely great to see you. Thanks for having us on.
And again, you used the word again because I was on your podcast, and I think that's going to show up here sometime this week, possibly. I'm just so excited to have you guys on. Now, Josh is a pastor in Virginia near Richmond, right? And
indeed, yes, I am. I planted a church, River City Underground. It started actually as Short Pump Community Church.
I saw that.
And
I wondered
you
what that was.
still see, the artifacts of that in the shortpump.church.
Okay.
Which if you type that in, it'll go to our website, which I finally changed to rivercityunderground.com, by the way. Well, you should be like applauding me or something.
Has that been a long time coming?
Yeah, you don't get praise for doing what you're supposed to do.
Well, I'm going to praise myself then, if nobody else will. No, I'm just kidding. No, so we started this church, my wife and I, and it did go through a name change, but we wanted to start in houses, and we started about 5 years ago. And then the pandemic hit, and we kind of like all met online, and we forged these relationships online. Kind of right before that happened, though, Will and I connected, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast?"
Yeah, and I'm going to get into that. Yeah,
I'm a pastor. So anyway, go ahead. Yeah. You can, Will, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Well, I think it's also, I'm just going to point out that on the things that I read about you guys and the ways that you talk, you lean more conservative than Will. I think that's one of the points of the thing that you're doing, this Faithful Politics podcast, that you guys come at things from a little different perspective. Yeah. And are you the faithful host?
I am the faithful host, and I lean probably more conservative than people actually think. Like, we have gotten the reputation of being a liberal podcast. We can go into that some other time, but
yeah, well, we're going to get into that in a certain way.
So
in a few minutes.
So anyway, I'm definitely we agree probably on guns. I don't think we've ever actually had like a structured, like reasoned conversation about gun control and the Second Amendment and any of that. So, but we probably disagree on quite a few things, especially around LGBTQ issues and probably around abortion, probably around some financial stuff, but I don't know. We actually haven't ever like hashed that out really.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've just heard Will refer to himself as the political host and you as the faithful host. And I just think if I had to choose one of those labels, I'd choose the faithful host, I guess. But
I enjoy it. I mean, I kind of feign ignorance, but then about like the news, but I try to keep up, but I really try to focus on theology and focus on understanding like the biblical part of it. Okay. And so that's kind of what I focus on and try to bring that perspective, but try to be myself. Yeah. Being a pastor, being trained on how to understand the Bible. And I've grown a lot in that and trying to help people do that, both in online and in person. I try to create spaces for people to really ask questions, and that's led me into a lot of uncomfortable places, but I've grown in ways that I don't think I ever could have grown without it. So it's been a really cool journey.
So Will, apparently, you call yourself more of a progressive and African, Asian, American Army veteran is what I've seen you describe yourself as, and an international consultant. And at some point you transitioned from atheism to Christianity. So why don't you just talk about sort of your role on this show? And then why don't you tell me about how you two even met each other and how you decided to do this?
Yeah. So my piece of the Faithful Politics podcast is on the latter part. So I am the political host, as you mentioned, and I am a progressive. Born and raised in Los Angeles, California. Moved up to the Seattle area, and then now I'm in Virginia. So I've drinking from the liberal fire hose for most of my life. and that's kind of what I bring to the table. So whereas Josh is more conservative, center right, I tend to be more center left. I wouldn't call myself like a socialist or far left or anything like that. But I do think that, progressivism is a good model in America, that it's more inclusive. And I'm also a believer as well. So, that me and Josh, while we are separated by politics, we are united by our faith.
Right.
And I think that's sort of the thread that kind of helps,
Yeah.
helps us be successful. And as far as like how our pod came to be, it's kind of a weird story. Most origin stories are, not big Marvel fan, by the way, so prepare for all the references. But, we, my wife and I and family were attending one church. As a guest speaker that day, Pastor Josh came and spoke. We've never met before. He's up there, he's speaking, did a pretty good job, I guess, and then later we saw him at a mutual friend's house. And I was like, oh, hey, you're that pastor guy, and then he's like, I don't think you remember me, but we got to talking.
Yes, I definitely did.
That's the correct answer. So we got to talking for a while. I quickly surmised that he's probably a conservative. I didn't know this for sure, but I knew that I had always wanted to have a podcast with a co-host that thought differently than I do, because I just have this natural knack for wanting to just engage with people that think differently than I do. So I asked him the question. He said yes, and then we started planning our podcast wedding. And
Wow.
then about a month afterwards, we were going live and talking. I mean, I barely knew the guy, to be honest, when we first started the thing. So if you were to listen to our very first episode, which I don't recommend, and you were to keep listening, you'll probably hear the relationship between Josh and I just grow on the show, which I think is pretty cool. If you wanted to, study the origins of a friendship, I think you could definitely do that by listening to all of our episodes.
Yeah,
all
and
the
that
sociologists out there, this is great material and it's
It is.
freely available.
So I want to bring something up that that relates to what we've been talking about with this conservative progressive thing. And I didn't tell you guys I was going to do this, but I want to set up our conversation this way. So something to be thinking about. We won't answer it right now, but something to be thinking about as we're talking. I want you to help me respond to a comment that I got yesterday. And it was a typical video by my standards, where I was just kind of railing against, the Christians, siding with some things that I think are kind of evil, or really evil. It's like the demonization of immigrants, the dehumanization of immigrants, that sort of thing. And the comment that I got, and I get it all the time, was along the lines of, why don't you just admit you're a progressive Christian? And I find this super interesting, because it's meant as a rebuke to me. It's meant as a way of dismissing anything that I might have to say about justice, which is what I was talking about in that video from a biblical perspective. You're a progressive Christian, and so therefore we don't have to listen to anything you have to say. And as though there's something wrong with being a progressive Christian. And so I commented back. I was kind of mean, but I made 3 points aside from the mean things I said. I said, number one, I don't think being called a progressive Christian is an insult. Number two, but I don't describe myself that way, because I was I don't know what I am. I was an evangelical pastor for 20 years. And I don't think that I've changed all that much, although I've been re-examining some of my assumptions, but I don't call myself a progressive Christian. But the third thing I said is, if I do go that direction someday, it's not going to be about politics. And here's the point I want to make, and just have you guys chew on as we're talking. Since one of you tends to be more progressive, one more conservative, I want to draw a line between being a political progressive and a Christian, a religious, a biblical progressive, and a biblical conservative, and a political conservative, because I don't see why those things are connected. I don't see why, if I say Christians ought not to participate in dehumanizing immigrants, how is that a progressive Christian point of view? Don't conservative Christians believe that also? That's the biggest tension I deal with as a guy who was an evangelical pastor for 20 years, still believe a lot of the things I believed. And I go, shouldn't we all believe this is, evil? That sort of thing. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that right away, or if you want.
I do,
okay.
Actually, because as a Christian who also is a progressive, I've spent the better part of my time in the faith trying to argue for my own existence in the faith. I came to the faith in an Assemblies of God church. I was very active in the worship team. I was a youth pastor, but I voted for Obama, and everybody at church knew that. And it wasn't received very well. So for a while, I did kind of consider myself a progressive Christian up until the podcast. The podcast kind of changed that for me because, we are seeing this sort of blending of faith and politics. The ironic nature of our podcast name, aside, but seeing these two blend together more closely, and I'm seeing progressive Christians, conservative Christians, and I'm like, I don't want to add to the separating of Christianity more by identifying as a progressive Christian. I'm a Christian who tends to vote progressive for progressive values. So that's how I sort of view that term. Now, as far as combining the two, if you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work on moral foundations, Democrats tend to have a much higher, heavier weight on care and concern than do conservatives. So, with sort of the current political climate we're in, any sort of instance where it seems like we're caring for the poor, we're caring for the least of these, we're caring for whatever, like Democrats by far, at least according to Jonathan Haidt's model, tend to have that muscle exercise much more often, much more frequently. That's not to say that conservatives don't care about, kids in Gaza or whatever. It's just those aren't things that get them fired up. Liberty, justice, stuff like that get them fired up. So I think any attempt for somebody to identify someone as a progressive Christian is doing a couple of different things. One, they're identifying that you have a care and concern element about you, which in my mind, I don't think is a bad thing. And just because progressives are the one doing that, we shouldn't view it as a pejorative, by calling somebody a progressive Christian.
Right.
The second thing is at least he's identifying you as a Christian. I would say, hey, if you're going to call me a conservative Christian, hey, at least you got the Christian part right. So let's talk about that and how that actually informs my progressivism, because I think you can actually have a really good conversation there. So that's kind of where I learned on the progressive Christian. I've been told I'm not going to heaven my entire life because I'm a Democrat.
Right.
It's fine. I know who I work for, so it's fine.
Right. I'm starting to get that since I started opposing Trump, you guys know I was a conservative Republican my whole life until Trump. And it's made me rethink a lot of things. And all of a sudden now I'm going to burn in hell. But anyway, Josh, how do you think about this?
I think the old me would have thought about this question and felt the intuitive side that Will is talking about of disgust or some kind of fear that I'm going to be found out. That I'm on this podcast of a progressive, someone who's labeled a progressive Christian, right?
Which again, I don't label myself that, but yeah,
and I don't label you that,
right?
Either, but people.
But I take it as a compliment that people actually think that about me. It tells me that I'm progressing as a human being.
you like,
I'm broadening. So,
yeah, I mean, and another thing that's, I think so when I think about these kinds of questions, I'm thinking about assumptions, all right? Because ultimately we're all making these decisions based on assumptions, and those assumptions are definitely affected by that elephant. And the writer that, well, he's referring to Jonathan Haidt's work, and that elephant, that intuition, that system. I think it's system one thinking, right? It's quick, it's intuitive, it's kept you alive so far. It's gonna be very powerful, and it's gonna kick in. It's always active, right? And it's like we got to get that prefrontal cortex working, and that's hard to do. And the writer's trying to control everything, and we're gonna have this default, and sometimes that's gonna divide us into conservative and progressive. And I think that like Will's insight on that, like on his reflection on what Haidt said, is really key, because again, like these assumptions, like that we can actually even define progressive Christian, like in some really precise way. Right. That we so precise that we can make it such a category that we would then give pretty like significant consequences to this category of people.
Right. Like you need like not be listened
ostracization, to. Right? This kind of ghosting that you're getting, what is it called when like people like keep like bothering you on the internet? Trolling, boom, trolling. Thank you. Like all that stuff that, it comes at a cost. And so but that assumes that we understand, like there's this distinct, recognizable set of beliefs on politics and ethics and biblical exegesis and all this like huge array of things. That just seems like a silly assumption given all that we know about the human brain, the psychology, the soul. I mean, what we can see from the Bible, what we can understand. Like we live in an age where we could be so educated and yet we are so misinformed.
Right.
Anyway, I digress.
No,
I have more helpful reasons. I have more things I could bring into the conversation, but I'll stop there and give some for others.
And I think I could summarize some of what you said by the fact that human beings are complex, and you're doing violence to a human person when you try to just put them on a pin and say you're either this or this. I mean, we're all complex, and I'm sure
way more complex than we ever thought.
Yeah, and I'm sure that if we spent an hour and just listed, 30 theological issues, and then 30 political issues, and 30 cultural issues, you guys are going to have big areas of agreement, some areas of disagreement, and a lot of those are going to cross any sort of boundaries we might have guessed that it would have been. And so that's one thing I want to get into here. So just given the fact that you've had a lot of guests on your program, a lot of really a diverse range of guests, were there any really surprising moments where you found that you agreed where you didn't expect? Have you guys found some surprising points of agreement on things that maybe you weren't expecting?
I know exactly who. It's Jonathan Rauch. He was a guy from New York, right?
Yeah, I love Jonathan Rauch.
So he says, I'm a gay Jewish atheist.
Right.
And I realized that like we needed Christianity. And he basically said, like 20 years ago, I wrote this piece and I said, thank God religion is shrinking.
Right.
In America. And he basically made this caricature of Christianity.
And he's repenting of it now.
He's repenting of it. And I can't tell you, when I listened to that again with my wife, how many chills and even like tears, like, I don't know, just thinking about the power of what we had, what we have, what we could have. And yet sin, in my opinion, the way I see the world, in my worldview, sin, brokenness, whatever you want to call it, it gets in the way, man. And it really wants to divide us, and we're so divided.
Well, I should preface by saying most of the guests I disagree with on our show, I intentionally seek out. So, I think it's important just to kind of put that caveat, because like I haven't tried to book, like a Klan member or something like that.
Right.
I would talk to a Klan member, but like the people I've had on, I wouldn't say I totally agree with everything they said, but I respected sort of their argument. So there's two that come to mind. The first was James Lindsay, who is a very outspoken anti-CRT. He's a bit of a firebrand, super nice guy, and he was making an argument that I can't really repeat now because I can't remember it, but I remember he said it in a way that started to kind of get my gears thinking a little bit differently. Started to challenge some of my biases, which I'm totally all for. That was an episode we recorded a couple years ago. A more recent one where we spoke with Kevin Roberts from the Heritage Foundation. We had a conversation about school choice. And I've got pretty strong views about, or I should say I had pretty strong views about school choice going into the conversation. And he explained it in such a way that made it not as scary as I had previously thought. Now, again, say that with a caveat. I'm fully aware about all the Christian nationalism, about the, sort of like Christianizing our education system. Yeah, I'm tracking on all that, but school choice as an option, especially for those in disadvantaged or minority populations, or homeschooling for families that, can do it and have like medical needs, like which happened to my family. I'm all for it. And I think we should really support families that have to take that as an option or want to take that as an option.
Yeah. So a related question. I'm wondering if there are things that the two of you can identify from your time talking with each other that where you've actually changed your mind on something because of something that the other one said to you, or through a series of conversations, or if not like a black and white change your mind, like where you've gotten just a lot more nuance in how you think about something important to you.
I think that I probably, actually, I will say one thing where I changed my mind. A very concrete example is in 2020, I was really wrestling with whether or not I was going to vote for Donald Trump. I was really wrestling with it. And Will would ask me like, hey, so why did you vote for Donald Trump? Because I told him I did in 2016. I was very open about it. And he asked me that. I'm like, I did it because of the Supreme Court, man. Like I just saw how much things changed. And like, regardless of my views on LGBTQ rights as an overall umbrella issue and how like law and how law should be like, executed in this country regarding that and how all these different like levels there's a lot of levels there for me. Like I started to really think, okay, I need to make sure that I am voting for someone who's going to get someone in office that's going to change the Supreme Court, because I just saw how much that in 2015 with Obergefell v. Hodges and the way in which like our nation, like it made a pretty drastic change, in terms of marriage and how it's defined and all that. And no matter where you fall in it, I think you'd have to admit it was a major conflict-inducing change. And so we're still with that. And I felt like, hey, I need to do my part. And so I voted for him. I said he got three in 4 years. Like he did his job. And I felt like I couldn't vote for him again. I was really struggling with it because I just saw what I thought were, I don't know, a lack of character at times. And, just there's a lot of things. I want to be measured and yet honest as I can be. But he really helped me process through that. So I didn't vote for him in 2020 is my point.
Yeah.
Nor in 2024. And I did vote third party in both of those cases. And that was like, Will really helped me think through that. And he's like, I just think he's not good for our country.
Right.
And he divides. And that was the thing I saw more than anything else. Donald Trump is a divisive character.
Mm-hmm.
He divides families. I've seen it firsthand. Divides friendships. I've seen it firsthand. Divides states and countries. And I'm like, man, that's charisma. That's kind of scary to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, I'm going to do what I can. And then we started this podcast.
Yeah.
So,
and that's cool. And I'll just say,
sorry I went on there. I just felt like you needed context.
That really helps me to think through how you think. Cause I think a lot of my listeners are going to be just really reacting to just disagreeing with you about this, about like the Supreme Court and stuff like that. But I come from your background. That's where I was. And I've been rethinking. That's some of the stuff I've been rethinking, but I completely understand. That's exactly what I, was in for 50 years, that way of thinking about the Supreme Court, that sort of stuff. And now, you said you were being careful to couch your language. I'll just say I am on record about twice a week as referring to Trump as a criminal sociopath. So I just want that to be said on this podcast. And then now, Will, how about you? What are something that you've learned or changed your, got some nuance on?
Oh gosh. Yeah, that's, I would say there's probably two things, one small, one maybe a little bit bigger. The small thing is, well, maybe this is the big thing. Before I met Josh, I've known racists in my life, and I'm not, that's probably a bad segue. Josh isn't a racist. But I've known I've known racists.
Thanks, Will, for going on record with that.
with like, very, very Southern past, but I've never met anybody directly related to the Confederacy, of which Josh is. And I caveat but the racism part, because I don't think Josh has a racist bone in his body. He's got black people in part of his immediate family, but when people talk about, Confederate and heritage and, versus hate, I'm clearly on the side of, if you're waving a Confederate flag, you're probably racist. But I can understand the value of someone saying, hey, my great grandparents were actually pretty good people. They were they couldn't go up north, but they do identify with the South and their Southern heritage. I think a little bit more about that when I'm seeing a Confederate flag or whatever, and and all these sort of like really, really bad emotions start to kind of well up in me. I think, okay, well, Josh isn't a bad guy. He's come from a good line, of Burtrams. Maybe they were abolitionists. I don't know, or maybe they own people. I don't know, but I know that Josh is a good person.
I don't know if either of those are true, but they were not abolitionists. I will tell you that.
Gotcha. All right. Good. And the other thing is probably just understanding how many people of faith are actually in the media, in the government. This is something I've learned from the show, not necessarily from Josh, but that are just good people trying to do an honest day's work. And I remember we had talked to Amanda Carpenter.
I like Amanda Carpenter.
Yeah, a couple of times. Great person. And I remember the first time we brought her on, we were talking about her book, Gaslighting America, which is an amazing book, by the way. And somewhere in the conversation, we started talking about faith, her faith. She's a person of faith. But then we started talking about other people of faith in the media sphere, of which at the time she worked for CNN. And she's like, yeah, like most of the staff at CNN are believers, she's like Jake Tapper's, man of faith. And she was just kind of just going off, and she's like, but like, these are people that, really kind of, they privatize their faith. They live their life in a way that honors their faith, but they're not necessarily trying to change legislation to turn people to their faith kind of thing. And it really kind of gave me a little sense of hope that, as a Christian, you're looking at all this Christian nationalism stuff. You're like, where the heck are all the Christians? Like, well, they're there. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing, despite the fact that I get to see it. So,
yeah. And I'll just one follow up on, thank you, by the way, one follow up on the Confederate flag thing. Being from Minnesota, I don't know what the culture is down there, and I understand it's complicated in the South with the Confederate flag. I'll just accept that. However, a few months ago, I was driving by a little town called Green Isle, Minnesota, with a farm with a big Confederate flag flying out in front. Whoever's flying that is a racist. If you're flying a Confederate flag in Minnesota, I'm just going to say you're a racist.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Yeah. Talk to me about a few of the guests that you've brought on who really did, who you just thought maybe ahead of the interview, this is going to be challenging, and it really was. Like, who are some of the more like controversial guests that you've had on where you've had to really prepare and sort through how you're going to deal with it?
Well, I can probably go ahead and start on that one. I think that, so interestingly, dude, I don't know why I can't talk. I'm sorry.
You nailed it.
I nailed it. We should make a show about that. It is of interest to me when I think about the people that I really did feel challenged by. One was Matthew Vines. And I think that I felt challenged by, I think I felt challenged by Matthew Vines because I thought he was really good at what he was doing in terms of his argument. Now I know that there are people that might disagree with me on that, and I get that. I know on the internet you're going to have all
tell us who he is, like what he.
So Matthew Vines, he wrote a book called God and the Gay Christian. He wrote one, I think it was in 2010 or 2012, something like that, and then he revised it with some substantial revisions. And actually, someone that he knows, Preston Sprinkle, we're going to have him on the podcast, Faithful Politics, sometime in the fall. But kind of probably going to talk about that because they know each other, they're friends and all that, I believe. And but essentially, like, he wrote this book that basically the premise is that if you are monogamous, you can be in a same-sex marriage because God doesn't want you to live with the kind of suffering and fruitless, and that was a big point of his fruitlessness of being single, being forced into that essentially. And I, pastorally, I felt sympathy for that. I mean, imagining like some of my greatest struggles and things, and being like, I don't know, something so close to my identity, and maybe. I know there's a lot of philosophical questions about this, ways that we could go, but my heart was definitely like stirred with compassion, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Right.
So I mean, that was one of them probably. There are other ones, and probably the other one was most challenging was Brandon Robertson. Is that?
Yep.
TikTok pastor, and he wrote a new book and has been very vocal about it. I have it somewhere there. Queer and Christian, I think, was the name. And so, that was challenging too, because they both basically said they had a high view of Scripture, and it was hard for me to work through that. And so it was pretty challenging for me because that's where I'm going to go to before anything else, before the Constitution, before any cultural thing. I'm going to try to go to Scripture. I'm going to try to understand it. I'm going to try to understand it in context. I'm going to try to give it the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to look at all the arguments, though, on both sides, liberal, progressive, all that, to conservative, all that, as much as I can. And I'm going to try to let that be the final authority for me. That's how I live my life. I try. Obviously, I fail. Right. Obviously, I'm not perfect by any means, very far from that. But I try to live my life basically by those principles. But of course, I'm as influenced as anyone by their culture and
Right.
their upbringing, and that elephant, going back to that system one thinking, that just like, it's intuition, automatic.
Right. Yeah. And people, like we've said, people are complex. These issues are complex. And I think like that kind of thinking you're talking about, Jonathan Haidt, where he's describing just that we want to simplify just in order to get through life. We want to simplify. We want as many just on-off switches as we can have in life, where we just flip the switch and keep moving and get on to other things. And when you guys have these conversations, it kind of makes, I think, everyone stop and say, okay, I'm going to engage with this, or at least it invites people to stop and engage with it, and not to just flip a switch, but to actually listen. And I think that's super valuable. How about you, Will? Challenging things that you've dealt with on the podcast.
Oh gosh. I mean, there's probably two notable episodes that really were challenging. So the first one was a conversation we had with a conservative podcaster by the name of Bryce Eddie, who, for those that don't know, he claims he's like BFFs with Charlie Kirk, pretty active in the Turning Point USA movement. We had him on just to kind of talk about a whole bunch of stuff, but in the middle of our conversation, mind you, if you watch the conversation, his sort of views towards me weren't necessarily all that friendly. He talked a lot about liberals and, like just spoke about liberals in a very poor light, which
Sure.
Kudos to him that he could say that, like just speaking face to face to me, like,
Right.
So that's good, I guess. But then he started just going off about a bunch of random stuff, which I'm sure I probably asked him a question, so I'm not blaming him for it, but and some of it was like, toxic masculinity and low testosterone levels and all kinds of other stuff. And mind you, I don't have a position on any of those things. But he was just sort of citing off a bunch of stuff that you may have heard in right-wing talking circles, and I didn't have a response for it. And that's not necessarily like our place. Like our sort of brand of podcasting isn't to play gotcha or to fact check everything that came out of a person's mouth. But somebody left a comment on our YouTube channel, actually, and emailed me too about how disappointed they were about, me platforming this person. And I remember just being so like, man, like, I mean, number one, I'm thinking like I let one of our audience members down. Like they listen to our show, like we're not famous, so I mean, hey, any person that wants to come listen to our show, hey, we will take you, but please feel free to suggest guests, but it really kind of stuck with me, because I'm just thinking like, what is our place? Like, who are the people that we should be platforming? Like, are we actually platforming them? We don't necessarily have like the Joe Rogan download numbers, so I'm not worried about some news agency catching our show and saying, oh, they had Bryce Eddie on. But I think that particular guest, I'll probably have him back on again just to kind of work through some of the stuff, because I think it's healthy just to kind of show that to the public. But probably the most impactful interview we ever did was with a woman named Amy Lowe. And she wrote a book called The Last Waiting Room. I thought I'd have it here because I want to push it, but the like her, she was sent to us by Tim Alberta. If your audience knows, he wrote a book.
I've done several podcasts about his book with my friend Dave Johnson.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's a wonderful book. And so we had him on a show. He sent me an email saying, hey, I've got this friend named Amy Lowe. She's got a pretty powerful testimony. I think she'd be great for your show. And I'm just like, well, I'm not going to turn down Tim Alberta, so had her on. Her entire book, her entire sort of thing is about the last waiting room. She had like stage 4 cancer, like in the brain, like all over her body. Doctor was giving her like X number of months to live, like 4 years later. She's still alive. And she was kind of just walking through like all the different things that she's done. She knows that she's going to die like soon. So, you know, she made amends with her ex-husband, like they were co-parenting their like teen or whatever that's going on. I mean, it was just like, it was like a redemption story where she was just sort of like righting all the wrongs of her life. And we did that interview probably about a year ago. And about 6 months ago, she passed. And I remember just like being so hurt, like I knew that was coming. And I actually went back and rewatched that video because I'm just like, man, this woman just had just such a heart for God, you know, like, and she lived her life to her fullest. She worked at a nonprofit, but also like, you know, really had a lot of hope in a time in her life where I would imagine would be pretty hard to find. Yeah. And during that moment, you know, I was going through some pretty significant issues. My old, I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. My 11-year-old had a brain tumor removed about 2 years ago. So it was right around the same time that we were interviewing her as well. And I just remember just thinking like, man, like if I could just have like a dime worth of your strength, you know, like, right. So that particular interview, I think will stick with me, you know, well beyond the podcast if we end it anytime.
Yeah. That's
I
beautiful.
Agree.
Yeah. I
agree.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I'll have to go back and watch that one now. But you know, you talked about platforming and you know, if it gives you any comfort, because I understand how, you know, our listeners can be disappointed if, you know, some of the choices we make, and the very nature of what you guys are doing, even more so than me, because you do come at it from two different perspectives. And so you want to have this balanced set of guests and stuff. But if it gives you any comfort, you know, Mehdi Hasan just went through that same thing. I don't know if you saw that Mehdi Hasan did this YouTube Jubilee debate where it was him versus 20 far right conservatives, they call themselves. And some of them just, you know, were just outright fascist. One guy called himself a fascist. And at one point, Mehdi Hasan just stopped talking because the guy had just called himself a fascist. And he had said that I'm going to, I believe in voting until we get in power. It's a great way for us to get in power, but then no more voting. You know, and just comes right out and admits it. And so Mehdi Hasan just stopped talking because he said, I don't debate fascists. You know, like you talked about, you know, how you would talk to a KKK member, but I bet you would put a whole bunch of guardrails around that and probably not debate. But he said, I don't debate fascists because we don't believe even in the basic principles that we're here. You know, you don't believe in debate unless it serves your purpose just to gain power. You know, that's not a conservative, that's a fascist. And, but anyway, he got raked over the coals by his audience for what you just said, for platforming that guy. I found the conversation incredibly valuable. I'm so glad I got to hear what that guy had to say. It's like, and I liked that there was somebody, you know, pushing back, asking questions, but I loved that I got to hear what that guy had to say. So I think that's what you guys are trying to do, is to get some points of view out there and process them together.
Yeah. And I do have something to say about that, but go ahead, Will. But
I was going to say, you know, one of the reasons that I think I have an affinity for wanting to talk to people differently than I do is because I don't go into the conversations with the intent to change their mind. I go into the conversation to really kind of understand. So like, you know, I'll never have Charlie Kirk on the show, even though it'd probably be great for ratings and, you know, the subscriptions, but it's like, it won't go anywhere because he's such a fast talker, you know, like I want to talk to the person I disagree with that is methodical, you know, that can work through and can answer questions. Because I think the more people see how to disagree in a civil way, they can start to imitate it. But like, there are no, like, you can't turn on TV and find, you know, a Democrat and a Republican on CNN or Fox News, and they're just like, yeah, you know, good point. I'll consider that. You know, like they don't do that because it doesn't get the clicks. But on our show, we really, really try to model that, not because it's I don't know, like good for ratings, because it's not, but it's because like that's who we are as people, and as believers.
Right. What were you going to say, Josh?
Yeah, what I was going to say is that I want to piggyback on what Will was saying about being curious, and I have learned to be curious. And I don't think that means you can't challenge someone, though. I think that it means that the way in which you're coming to them, there's an actual intent of curiosity, and that the other person, like, they know that you want to know what's going on. Once someone feels safe enough to do that, and I hope that anyone would feel safe enough, because what's the threshold? That's hard to say. I mean, given the complexity of a human being, like you said, even like remember American History X and the transformation that happens in that, that movie. It's like you would look at someone like that. Oh, have you seen it, Will?
Of course I've seen it.
I'm going to cut this part of the conversation out where I admitted I didn't see this movie. I'm going to go watch it. Yeah. Basically,
it's a transformation of a guy who is in like a white, white nationalist gang that was violent, and he went to prison, and then he was transformed in that prison experience to be like that racism out of him. And like you look at something like that, and you start to think, hey, people, they're complex, that they might change, something different might happen. So I tend to not want to have a threshold per se, although if something was really causing me an issue, I would explore it, and I would explore it with Will. And I can't imagine things that were lurid or just like kind of, I don't know, shock value enough that we would probably say we're not going to do that, because that would distract from the mission, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
But I think that I want to understand what people are actually saying. I want to actually, and I want them to say it to me. I want them to tell me what they're actually thinking. Like if someone thinks some really abhorrent thing in our society, I actually want to know why they think that. Like, can they get to a place where they have said, yeah, I just want to know their method of how they came to that. Because if they kind of get to the place where they're like, oh, well, I really don't know why I believe that. That's insight. And even if they never come to anything that I would be close to my belief, at least there's some kind of insight there to say, maybe I should ask that question. And who knows, maybe the Holy Spirit, in my view, my worldview, maybe God, Holy Spirit, whatever, might use that in their life. And so I think in that kind of missional way a lot. I try to, at least.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really want to understand what people are saying, and I want them to say it out loud so that we really get it. And I think you can challenge people in that way, because again, can I just say one more thing and then go to you, Will? Is the guy who wrote The Case for Christian Nationalism, Stephen Wolfe.
Stephen Wolfe. We talked about him yesterday.
Yeah, so we were like, hey, so I just want to make sure that I'm clear. Are you saying that you think there should be a law that essentially favors Christians in political office? Like the lemon test, right? Kind of out the door. And he's like, yes.
Right.
And then
he's very explicit in that book. I read that book. And,
I want him to say that. I want him to explain that so that I'm not saying it. I'm not making some caricature. He's explaining it. Right. He's going through it. And then people can decide on the basis of what it really is, whether or not they agree with that. Because I think there's a lot of people that would say, oh, yeah, I'm Christian nationalist. But then when it comes to like, oh, do you think people should be banned from holding office if they're not Christians? They'd be, oh, no, I think that's
he does. He does.
And I know, but I think there's a lot of people that might say, oh, that's fine, or that's not threatening or whatever.
Right.
But then they wouldn't actually go that far.
No, that guy, I make fun of him. If I didn't have to go to Will, because I know he's been dying to say something, I would tell you my standard Stephen Wolf joke. But go ahead, Will.
No, yeah, I was just going to say that, to prove our point, or to prove what Josh was just saying. Sometimes we do have very, what's the word? I wouldn't say divisive, but we have guests that can draw a crowd. And one time we had Lucian Greaves on the show, who is the co-founder of the Satanic Temple. And really nice guy. I remember when we booked him, I told Josh, I was like, oh, we just booked Lucian Greaves, co-founder of Satanic Temple. And like, that was a talk for a while around the church. I know around your dinner table. I know that for a fact. And I was telling people like, yeah, we're having this guy on. And I don't know how many people I know that were Christian were like, why would you bring that guy on? Like what? Huh? So we bring him on. The entire show was focused on religious freedom. Because I mean, that's sort of a big focus of our show.
Right.
And we also just wanted to address some of the comments, or some of the, I don't know, like things we've heard people say, oh, they're not a real organization. They're just trolling, and according to Lucian, like, no, like these are real believers. They're not satanic worshipers. Like they are actually fairly like agnostic, if you will. So like, but they are a group of believers that actually, believe the things that they do, and just want to be represented in kind of the same religious sphere as other religions. Now, they do troll quite a bit.
Indeed.
They had a they had a thing on their website once about Sam Alito's mom. I won't talk about it, but you can Google it yourself. So yeah, they can be pretty like harsh, but but at the core of it, they just want to have the same religious freedoms as like Christians do. And the comments that we got, actually, you'd be surprised. Like most of the comments we got on our YouTube channel were, I can't believe a pastor would actually talk to Lucian. Like there was just a lot of people that were just surprised in like the good way, like, okay, I've never seen that happen before, and I'm like, thank you. Like, that's exactly what we were hoping to achieve.
Yes. And is that the origin of when I started getting called Beard Boy?
Probably. Yeah. Yeah.
There's someone or a group of people that they just call me Beard Boy. They're like, oh, here he is. All hail King Beard Boy and what he has to say. And it's like, I'm like, dang, I'm like trolled. It's like my beard is under attack. It makes me feel vulnerable, dude.
Well, this has been fun to talk to you guys. And I'll just give you a chance just at the end here to sum up. Like, you guys have learned a lot from talking to each other over the years. And any advice that you have for the rest of us on how to talk to each other when you disagree on some really, I mean, I hear some major areas that I know if I would have pushed in this area or that you'd find some real disagreements here. But what are some rules that you guys have learned, rules of engagement for how to do this?
I would say the rules of engagement for me is, it almost is as simple as seek to understand and then be understood. That like whole, like 7 values of highly effective people, Stephen Covey. And, he had some really great principles in there, but if you think about
I think he got it from St. Francis.
That wouldn't surprise me. And if you think about that, like, it's so profound, because when you seek to understand what that means, it starts to be like, oh, wait, well, I should identify my own assumptions. I should start to think, where did I even have evidence for that? On what basis do I have this belief? That's a very good question to ask yourself, because you might be surprised how much you have no clue on the basis in which you have it. It's grandma said it. Who grandma get it from? Well, again, you go a couple of things back. You don't have any idea. It goes into the void of like general human knowledge, you know. So
It's
it's like
turtles all the way down. So,
that's it, man. And you have to listen. And when you try to understand, then you want to ask good questions. You don't want to ask just to be ahead. You actually want to seek truth. And I think that common and mutual exploration and mission that Will and I have to look at truth as honestly as we can, that drives me actually, probably more than anything else. And I think that drives Will a lot. I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but it's like we want to talk about truth. We believe truth is ultimately in Jesus. But then we're open to understanding how people differ on that and defining that and asking hard questions. And I've tried to make, again, a Spaces Online. I'm part of Spaces Online. I do work with pastors, help pastors, create. They create like sermon series and stuff like that, and I do that, and I help guys. And part of what I do is I help them think through what's culturally happening. So everything I'm doing in the church and this and the podcast, it's all about how do we create spaces where people can become culturally aware, but they're logically rigorous. They're critical thinkers. They're not easily deceived. They're lovers of truth. That's really what a philosopher is supposed to do, right? A lover of truth, of wisdom, which is just truth applied. So again, I think you listen to people, and as much as you can do that, as much as you can focus on that, then you'll be transformed in that listening process, and then you can then be understood. And think about how much transformation can happen if it's like this back and forth, like, hey, I'm seeking to understand, and then now I'm being understood, and then back and forth, and like that mutuality and compassion and this pursuit of truth. It's a beautiful thing. And I think we need more of that.
Anything you want to add to that, Will?
Yeah. So I wrote something in the published in the Christian Ethics today called Staying Grounded. 10 rules for engaging politics without losing your mind. I won't read all of it, but I will just read the 10.
Is that something I can link to in the comments?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
So the first one is don't defend politicians as if they're beyond criticism. Number 2, accept that you can't be an expert on everything. 3, don't let the media decide what matters most to you. 4, let go of outrage over hypocrisy. 5, think of political parties as tools, not identities. 6, read source documents when possible, according to Truthing that Josh just said. 7, be open to changing your mind. 8, seek out different perspectives. 9, ask who benefits. And 10, don't assume why you know someone voted the way they did. So in every political conversation I ever go into, I enter with those things because I've seen my own journey. I've said it often on the show that the Trump sycophant that we like to criticize and make fun of was me during Obama. I mean, when Obama was running for president, one, nobody thought he'd win because he was black, right? And we've all seen this movie before. So then when he won, I'm excited for a lot of different reasons. One, first black president, he's also a Democrat. I mean, I literally have probably 3 or 4 pieces of Obama t-shirts or swag or something like that. They don't fit me anymore because that was a different time in my life. But I also have the very first newspaper that showed from 2008, so I've got all the memorabilia. I've got the Obama MAGA hat, if you will, so I do understand how people can just totally get wrapped up in a candidate and be fed by way of whatever news you consume, right or left.
Right.
So knowing that that's sort of the general characteristic of most voters, I go into every conversation just knowing that, hey, this person is the byproduct of all the media they consume, of all the politics that, they consume. And that's their starting point. My starting point is like, I just want to know why you believe that stuff,
Right.
And I think part of the problem when you go into any conversation is to make it a safe place where they don't automatically have their defenses up. That's something that we have to do on our podcast when we're talking to people. Like, we talked to the first trans bishop, she's asking questions to kind of figure out how Trumpy Josh is, or we talked to somebody from the far right and they're trying to gauge if I'm a member of Antifa. Like, I get that. Like we go into conversations and we have to bring the temperature down a little bit, get to know them, which goes against all the normal podcast stuff of like, you got to bring the value proposition as soon as you can, like we're just like, I actually want to kind of get to know them and I want the audience to see us getting to know them. So the first question we generally ask most of our guests is, hey, how did you get into the profession you did? You are doing this, but you also have these hobbies, like square that for me. And then the last question that we normally ask is one Josh always asks is, what gives you hope? And what you'll see is that most people have a pretty similar origin story, and most people tend to want to hope for the same thing: better country, better livable wage, better whatever, and at the bookends of each of our episode, it's like you are probably the most important, 5-10 minutes of the entire episode. What they say in the middle is important, but we get to humanize them at the front end and we get to humanize them at the back end. And I think that's the most important thing that anybody can take away from this when you're engaging people about politics.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And also I learned a podcasting thing about putting the value proposition.
I just learned that too.
I need to read an article at least about how to do podcasting. This would be so much better. But well, thanks you guys. I really appreciate it. I just love talking to you too.
Absolutely.
And I just want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, because I think it's so valuable. It's so rare to be able to find people lately who are talking across their differences in a way that we're actually getting somewhere in the conversation. So I just want to, I admire you guys for doing that. And I appreciate you coming on here. So
thank you. We love what you're doing.
Thank you. And so that's it for today. And thanks everyone for listening.